Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 103, Meno 81d to 82a. According to Socrates, someone who knows absolutely nothing except for one thing can eventually know everything simply by looking into the soul, which already knows everything because the soul has seen everything, and this is because it is eternal and has seen everything in this world and in Hades, because it has been around for so long, even though every time it comes up to earth it drinks from the river Lethe and forgets everything. That part isn't in the story, but we should remember that. That's why the human doesn't know anything. Socrates never actually explains how the human gets to know one thing at all. I would suggest that it's by seeing things. This is how the soul learns things, by seeing. Therefore, I would suspect that a human could also learn one or two things simply by looking. But Socrates makes the important point that everything in nature is connected. Therefore, once the human knows one thing, it can search for other things in the soul, which we remember already knows everything because it's seen everything, and can then learn everything. I say learn. This is what recollection is all about, according to Socrates. The human rummages around in the soul and remembers things. It brings up memories. It recollects. And that, according to Socrates, is learning. Now we know that the story must be true because Socrates has heard this story from priests, priestesses, and poets, such as Pindar, although the quote he gave from Pindar didn't tell us this story, but simply hinted at reincarnation and purification and the consequent possibility of living a heroic life. Does Plato expect us to take this story seriously? Hardly. It's a very bad story, obviously. But even more to the point, does Socrates expect Meno to take this story seriously? I suggest that he would rather that Meno had noticed some irregularities in the story. It would have implied that Meno may have begun to think critically. As it is, Socrates has engineered the story so that even if Meno does accept it all, there is a point. The point is in this conversation. It has nothing to do with grand philosophy. It's about how this conversation can continue. If we remember, Meno has opted out. He's tried twice now to excuse himself from giving another answer about arete, virtue. And Socrates is now doing what he can to bring Meno back into the conversation. And this is what we now see as Socrates comes to the point of the story. Ukunde pethesthai tuto to eristiko logo. So one shouldn't believe this eristic argument. Meno's second attempt at avoiding answering the question, what is virtue, was through showing the impossibility of discovering anything, since one either knows everything already and therefore there is nothing left to discover, or one knows nothing and can therefore not tell even if something is discovered. This is based on the eristic question, who learns, the one who knows or the one who doesn't know? and the options are as extreme as possible. Either one knows everything or one knows absolutely nothing. And because those two options are so extreme, the eristician will always be able to win an argument against someone who chooses either of those options. Socrates has effectively solved this barrier to further inquiry by accepting that there is the possibility of knowing nothing and the possibility of knowing everything. But then he combines them. It's the soul which knows everything, but the human who knows nothing. And then all the human has to do is search the soul where everything is already available, all knowledge is in the soul, and the human can then recall things which are connected to other things which the human somehow has managed to learn, probably just by looking. Basically, Socrates is exploiting the eristic dichotomy of complete knowledge or complete ignorance, which Meno seems to accept in order to persuade Meno to continue, because the complete ignorance of the human is countered by the complete knowledge in the soul, and the human can therefore, for no apparent reason, gain all of that knowledge from the soul with a little bit of effort. This is not how a student like Meno would usually learn. He simply listens to sophists. This is how someone learning from Socrates would use his brain. He would actually have to think. Although even a dialectician with his students doesn't try to get them to recall truth from their souls. There is no assumption in dialectic that the soul already knows everything. That's the whole point. That's why a dialectician encourages students to compare, contrast all of the opinions that the human already has. By the way, opinions are not catered for in this story. There is only knowledge and a big, vast emptiness in the head of the human. Of course, Socrates can't explain all of this to Meno, and if he could, he wouldn't have needed to make up this appalling story. But this story is precisely what Meno needs in order to be persuaded to continue in this conversation. Socrates does, however, contrast the two arguments in order to point out that some effort needs to be made. Houtos men gar anhemas argus poieseien, caestintois malakois ton anthropon, heidus accusai, hodede ergaticus tecae zeteticus poie. For this one, the eristic argument, it's interesting that Socrates calls both arguments this, although he uses this, the usual this, for the eristic argument, and this one right here for the anti-eristic argument. For this one would make us lazy, and it is pleasant for soft or effeminate of the humans to hear. It's pleasant for them to hear this. But this one here, this argument, the one we've just had, this one makes us active and disposed to searching. Ho ego pisteuon alethe enai, ethelo metasu zeten arete hoti estin. I, believing this to be true, wish to search with you what virtue is. Does Socrates really believe that one of the most inconsistent and ridiculous stories he's ever told is actually true? No. Why does he tell Meno that he thinks that it's true? Because for Meno, there's no distinction between the two stories. They are both valid for him. Even when Socrates says that the eristic argument is pleasing to effeminate people or soft people, Meno is a bit of a softy. He's still an eromenos. And didn't Socrates just say that the other argument requires effort? That's not what Meno likes to hear. But when Socrates says that this one is true, we might think that Meno would be more likely to accept that option, the anti-eristic argument. Let's see how all of this has affected Meno. Nai, o Socrates, alla pos leges tuto hoti uman thanomen, alla hen kalumen mathesin, anamnesis estin. Eches me tuto didaxai, hos hutos eche? Yes, Socrates. But how do you mean this, that we don't understand or we don't learn? But what we call learning is recollection. Can you teach me this, that this is the case? Kai arti eponomenon hoti pan urgos kai nun erotas echos didaxai, hos ufevi didachen enai al anamnesin, hinede euthus phaino mai autos auto tanantia legon. I said just now, Meno, that you're wicked, and now you're asking me if I can teach you, I who claim that teaching is not anything but recollection, so that I might appear immediately to be contradicting myself. Socrates would be contradicting himself if he tried to teach Meno when he has just said that learning is recollection, because if the learning process requires the soul and the human, it doesn't require external help in the form of a teacher. And the only problem with this is that it was because Socrates told Meno this story that Meno is aware at all of this process. In other words, Socrates has taught him in a way. It's a very bad teaching method, but it is what Socrates did. This did not come from Meno's soul. The main problem, of course, is that Meno is still asking for help from outside. He hasn't tried to think for himself at all. And this is something that Meno is aware of, that he always asks for people outside himself to teach him.